My sister vanished at Camp Whisperwind about 3 decades ago, to be precise. It was in the lake next to the camp. Not many people have heard about it, but it was the first summer camp my parents ever sent us to, way back in the day. Opened in '93. It was supposed to be this big deal. You know, a slice of old-timey lakeside fun, mixed with that summer camp magic. People loved it, at least at first. It wasn't as fancy as the other camps, but that just made it feel more real, like the magic was closer to home. It had these cool rope swings, a dock for fishing, and this huge man-made lake. They even had a bonfire pit where we'd roast marshmallows. It's like they plucked out the image of the perfect lakeside summer straight out of your head. But then stuff started happening, mostly around the staff getting involved in weird accidents. It didn't make the news much. The camp's owners were good at keeping things quiet, but they couldn't stop the stories from reaching the nearby towns. Let's just say, it wasn't unusual to see a camp counselor in the ER in those days. Still, people loved Camp Whisperwind. Then those kids were lost. A lot of the details around their disappearances were kept out of the press. They said it was out of respect to the grieving families. Sure, and I'm sure the NDAs were part of being respectful. Things calmed down after a while, but the accidents continued to pile up. Getting assigned to work at Camp Whisperwind became like a prison sentence. The owners eventually did close down the camp. They said there wasn't enough demand for it to stay open. That I can believe. Staff injuries were fine as long as the place was still making money apparently. So now it's just been sitting there all this time, rotting away. People forgot about it, or they tried to. But you know how stories are. They don't really die. Rumors started cropping up about why it really closed. Some said it was the water. Others thought it was cursed, haunted by the lost. The owners tried to bury it, cover up all traces, like it never existed. They put up fences, big ones, with padlocks and no trespassing signs all over. The camp tried to make everyone forget, like it never happened. But how could I forget my own sister? Sarah was just a kid. Man, 9 years old, and she always had that look in her eyes, like everything was an adventure. Then one day she just wasn't there anymore. That summer we went to Camp Whisperwind. Was a big deal for us. My folks didn't earn much. Vacations, they were like finding $20 in an old pair of jeans. Rare and exciting. So when they told us we were going to summer camp, Sarah and I lost our minds. We were bouncing off the walls, counting down days like it was the lead up to Christmas. We didn't even care that it was just at Camp Whisperwind. Growing up near the camp in Florida, and being too poor to go always felt like a bad joke. As a kid, I remember packing into our old station wagon. Everything crammed in so tight you couldn't see out the back window. The drive felt like forever. Me and Sarah made up games to pass the time. I Spy got old fast, so we invented stories about the stuff we'd do at Camp Whisperwind. When we finally got there, it was like stepping into another world. The place had this vibe. You know, we couldn't get our swimsuits on fast enough. That day, man, it was perfect. The sun was shining, the water was cool, and the rope swings, those swings were something else. Sarah was fearless, always a couple steps ahead, daring me to follow her on the biggest swings. And I did, every time. Our parents were happy to stay by the picnic tables, just to watch us having the time of our lives. Mom had this smile the whole day. Dad tried to act all cool and collected, but even he couldn't resist trying out the rope swing. It was like we were a perfect picture family, complete with pets. Apparently the camp liked to keep a few stray dogs around for security. The staff explained. We'd never had pets before, so getting to pet as many as I want was the cherry on top of a perfect day. We stayed until they practically had to kick us out. It was one of those golden memories. You know, Everything felt right in the world. That'd be the last time we'd all be together. Happy like that. After what happened to Sarah, things, they just weren't the same. After that trip to Camp Whisperwind, something changed in my little sister. She got sick, but not like any cold or flu we'd ever seen. She was always thirsty, drinking water like it was going out of style, and she wouldn't stop talking about swimming, about going back to Camp Whisperwind, about how the water felt. It started slow. At first it was just her being more tired than usual, but then the thirst kicked in. She'd drink glass after glass of water, and it was never enough. You'd find her at night, just standing over the sink. She'd be gulping it down like she'd never seen water before. It was odd, watching her. She'd always been the feisty one, always moving, always laughing. But as the days went by, she grew quieter, and then she started to avoid food, only wanting water. It didn't matter what we did, nothing worked. Her eyes grew sunken and desperate. After a few days, her body had started wasting away. It was heartbreaking, seeing her like that. Mom and Dad took her to doctors, lots of them, but they all just scratched their heads. They ran tests, asked questions, gave her a bunch of drugs, even hooked her up to a feeding tube. But Sarah just kept getting skinnier, paler. It was like she was fading away right in front of us, and no one could figure out why. The only thing that could perk her up was water. Medical bills started piling up fast. I had to grow up a lot quicker than I would have. We eventually had to take Sarah home the night she disappeared. It was like any other Tuesday. We all went to bed like usual, but Mom, she was really worried about my sister. She barely got any sleep because she'd check on her throughout the night. It was during one of these rounds that she found Sarah's bed empty, her princess curtains torn away from the open window. Panic set in fast. I woke up to the sounds of Mom crying into the phone as she called 911. Police showed up immediately and put out an alert. Mom and Dad went around town calling for Sarah. They knocked on people's doors, called other people's parents, and checked for any place a 9-year-old would head to. At that point, they didn't want to think about the possibility that Sarah was taken. They were still holding on to the hope that she just ran away. And then as dawn broke, we got a call from the police. They found Sarah's sweater. It was by one of the dogs at Camp Whisperwind. It was torn up and covered in dog hair. Seemed like one of the local critters was using it as a blanket, but that was all they found. Everyone was baffled. How did such a sick kid manage to walk that far on her own? And the camp was locked up for the night. Yet somehow Sarah got in. It didn't make any sense, but the police said that the camp owners were willing to help them search for Sarah too. They'd let the police bring in search parties, as long as they didn't hurt any of the dogs that live in the park. Cops and volunteers combed the place until sundown. My parents had to be dragged out when the place had to close for the night. That went on for a week. They even spread out to the woods around Camp Whisperwind. They never found any other trace of Sarah. No other sign that she was even at the camp at all. It was like she just vanished. Some men in suits came by soon after that. They offered my parents a deal to keep this whole thing quiet. My parents were furious. Everything started going wrong after our trip. They blamed it all on the camp. There must have been something in the water that made Sarah sick, but we had no choice. We were drowning in debt, and my parents needed the hush money. It tore us apart. You know, losing Sarah like that, and being forced to keep quiet about it. My family never really moved on from it. We were always tense around each other after that. We later found out Sarah wasn't the only disappearance linked to Camp Whisperwind. There were other kids who also vanished under mysterious circumstances. People started whispering about some brain-eating amoeba in the water. And the camp owners, they latched onto that story like a lifeline, blaming everything on it. Fast forward a bunch of years, and life's taken me places I never thought I'd go. Ended up working for a security firm. It's your standard rent-a-cop place. It's not glamorous, but it paid enough for someone who only had a high school diploma. Then, one day, I got this job order. It was paying way above our usual rate. That was because it was a job from the camp owners themselves. They wanted a night watchman, and guess where? Camp Whisperwind. Their current guy was retiring, and they needed a replacement. Despite the generous offer, no one really wanted the job. Any facilities the resort had were long gone. That means no electricity, no running water, and no cozy employee lounge. Any watchman would have to set up a makeshift camp on site and bring lots of bug spray. The job order included a massive budget to cover any supplies we'd need, enough for a decent-sized tent, a generator, a stove, and as much food and water as we can carry. The company would be happy to reimburse us anything else we'd need. I was the only one who was willing to take the job. My dad just had a stroke. I needed the money to cover the bills. Besides, I figured it might give me some sort of closure. You know, if I confront the place that took my sister, maybe I could finally let go of the anger, of the guilt. As soon as I volunteered, my boss gave me the job packet, along with the old watchman's contact details. He was a guy named Robert, and he's retiring after being on the job for 12 years. I texted the number and was told to show up to this diner downtown for my training. Robert was this tall, thin dude with wrinkles. You could tell he'd seen some stuff. He drank coffee like his life depended on it too. "Jed," he said, handing me a beat-up flashlight. "Keeping people out of there is more important than you think, especially when it gets dark." Then he pulled out a map of the place. It was old and worn, with notes written all over it. In the bottom right corner were a list of rules. Rule 1, do not talk to the scarecrow. He pointed to an X by the entrance. Might sound funny, but trust me on this. It's bad luck, son. I nodded. Every gig has its superstitions. You don't question them if you want to get along with the people you're working with. Rule 2, remove any tools you see lying around. He glanced around like the ground might sprout a hammer or something. Tools left out can cause problems, he said. He told me that as soon as I see any during my rounds, I should take it out of the camp. He left me a toolbox with a heavy-duty padlock on the job site. I was to take any tools and dump them in there. Make sure you don't ever leave that box unlocked, Jed. This is all to keep you safe, he explained. Rule 3, don't cross the stream. Try not to even look at it. Nothing good comes from paying it any mind. Now I know I haven't been to the place since I was a kid, but I don't think there actually was a stream in the park. Robert must have seen the confusion on my face, because he gave me this look that told me I shouldn't even bring it up. I mean this one, Jed. You'll know it when you see it, he said, with finality before moving to the last rule. Rule 4, follow the dogs when you get lost. That one caught me off guard. They know this place better than anyone. Before I could really process that, Robert clapped me on the shoulder a bit too hard. Stick to these, and you'll be all right, he said, before leaving me to my own devices. Well, like I said, every job has its quirks. Being a night guard's a pretty boring job. Honestly, I suppose these rules Robert had were more about making him feel like he's actually doing something. I spent the rest of the day packing up for my first shift. I bought a tent, lots of water, some flare guns, and a sleeping bag. The owners mentioned they'd leave a boat for me at the dock. Felt kinda weird, heading to a job in a boat. But okay. The ride over was calm. Just me and the sound of water. When I landed, it was straight into the wilderness. The path to Camp Whisperwind was choked with weeds and vines, Felt like I was the first person to walk through in ages. Finally, I hit the entrance. Man, it was a mess. The sign that used to welcome everyone was so faded, you could barely tell what it was. It just hung there, looking tired and beaten by the weather. The little buildings and booths near the entrance were all falling apart. Roofs caved in, wood rotted through, everything was covered in a layer of grime and moss, and the air there was this weird mix of smells, rust, mold, and a faint hint of lake water. I set up my camp right there at the entrance. Seemed like a good spot, close enough to see if anyone tried to sneak in. The sun was getting low. By the time I finished, I figured I should make my first round of the camp while it was still light enough to see. Near the entrance was this old statue of a scarecrow. He had a wide, welcoming smile, his arm gesturing towards the camp. But man, time hadn't been kind to the scarecrow. The paint on him was peeling off in big chunks, showing the gray beneath, and parts of him were just crumbling away, like he was slowly turning to dust. A huge black dog snoozed by its feet. I pulled out the map Rob gave me, trying to get a sense of where to head first. That's when I noticed something odd. According to the map, the scarecrow statue was supposed to be on the other side of the entrance. I glanced back at the statue, then down at the map again. Weird. But I shrugged it off. I was getting a pretty good idea of why Rob had to retire. I gave the statue a pat on its head, expecting it to fall apart under my hand. It felt cold and slightly damp. The dog's tail twitched in its sleep, and I bent down to pet it. "Keep an eye on things for me, will ya?" I briefly wondered if that counted as breaking the first rule. If the owners had some sort of camera system to check, I'd say I was talking to the dog. I walked around, and the map Rob gave me wasn't adding up. He'd marked spots where certain structures should be, but they either weren't there, or were completely different from what the map suggested. The whole camp was a mess. Everywhere I looked, things were rotting or crumbling away. The place was overgrown with weeds and bushes that were almost as tall as I am. Thick carpets of leaves and vines covered the ground. The lakeshore was crawling with mold and smelled awful, and there were a lot more scarecrow statues around here than I remembered. It wasn't just the one at the entrance. There were a lot of them scattered around, all in different poses and costumes. Here and there, I'd see a dog lounging around, and as I moved deeper into the camp, I kept hearing this grinding sound, like concrete scraping against something. These buildings were falling apart all around me. I couldn't help but think about all the safety violations this job was putting me through. So much for OSHA standards. Then that's when I saw it, right there in the middle of the path. A screwdriver, but not just any screwdriver. This one looked shiny and new. I remembered Rob's second rule and stopped in my tracks. Why was there a brand new screwdriver just sitting here? It almost seemed like it was left there on purpose. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my hand. I turned around to make my way back to the entrance. This must be some sort of test, to see if I could follow instructions. They'll probably check the toolbox after my shift to see if I did. As I walked back, those grinding noises kept up, surrounding me. The whole place was gonna fall apart right before my eyes. But deep down, a part of me wasn't so sure that was it. It all sounded too deliberate. And when I finally got back to the entrance, that's when I noticed something weird. The scarecrow. The statue wasn't like how I remembered. Before, he was looking out to the path, ready to welcome kids into the camp. But now, he was turned towards the gate, like he was waiting for me to come back out. My heart did a little jump. There must have been someone else here. Hazing, training, whatever they want to call it. But it explained everything. I quickly locked up the screwdriver in Rob's toolbox, I decided to play by their rules. I heard how controlling the owners can be with their staff, all to keep the magic alive. They wanted people who can follow rules, even if they didn't make a lot of sense. I figured it was just some sort of test. Sounds about right. But just when I calmed down, I heard a noise that made me look back over my shoulder. It came from inside the camp. It was getting real dark now, but I could see something shining in the distance. I walked closer and saw a hammer, shiny and new like the screwdriver from earlier. It was by the feet of another scarecrow statue, as if it had dropped it off to the side. I could just make out footsteps running away from me. There was someone else in here. Maybe some kid looking for a thrill, or someone wanting to take a piece of the camp home. Or it could all be part of the test, feeling a bit more like I had a real job to do. I followed the sound. "Hey," I called out as I walked. "You're not supposed to be here." It was fully dark now. I had to use my flashlight to get around. One wrong move, and I could step on a rusty nail, or fall into an empty pit. Every now and then, I'd catch the sound of footsteps, just out of reach. It was like playing a game of tag with a ghost. I was deep into Camp Whisperwind now. More trees started blocking my way. At this point, it felt more like a forest than a family resort, and every now and then, I'd spot a scarecrow statue. They were everywhere, in the middle of paths, clustered around trees, lined up in rows, dozens of them. But they weren't the regular kind of scarecrow statues you'd find in the bigger parks. No, these were weird, arms too long, joints bent at odd angles, sunken eyes. The deeper I went, the more scarecrows I found. Some of them really didn't belong in a summer camp. One had a torn-up Santa outfit draped over it. Another was painted all wrong, its colors looking like a photo-negative version of a scarecrow. But the one that really stopped me in my tracks was this scarecrow, dressed like he was ready for a safari, and he was holding a machete that looked way too real for comfort. But all of them still had that iconic grin. I wondered if the owners were using this place as some sort of dumping ground. Some of these had to be rejects. There was one that didn't even have a head, and the whole time, those footsteps kept on going, with the occasional laugh floating back to me. Well, glad this intruder was having a great time leading me around. I could hear heavy breathing now too. Whoever it was must be getting tired, but no matter how much I ran, the figure was always just outside my flashlight. Meanwhile, the statues I passed by got stranger. They were of all shapes and sizes now. One was a scarecrow dressed as a clown. Its makeup was smeared. In its hand was a balloon, but instead of floating, it sagged to the ground. Another was a really fat one, not in a cute chubby way. Instead, its stomach bulged out across a path. Its face was bloated and blue. Veins ran all over its figure, straining against its bulk. It looked like a drowning victim. I knew it was made of nothing but cement, but still, the way its flesh folded and stretched looked disturbingly realistic. I wondered, who the hell would make something like that out of concrete? And then I heard it, the sound of rushing water. I brushed past some weeds to see an actual stream flowing right there in the middle of the camp. Some benches lay broken by the bank. Despite the name, Camp Whisperwind wasn't supposed to have any streams, just a lake. And there weren't any streams near this place, or at least, there wasn't supposed to be any. I fished out Rob's map. I looked closer, and saw a little squiggly line in the middle of the camp. Rob left a note next to it that said, "Stream starts here." I had brushed it off earlier, thinking he was being poetic or something, but the old geezer wasn't joking. And there, right by the stream bank, stood another one of those weird scarecrow statues. But this one caught my eye for another reason. Its smile was the same bright, happy one, as all the rest. One of his hands was raised up, balled into a fist, and in its gloved hand was the hammer I forgot to pick up earlier. And that was what actually broke me, because this wasn't a themed statue. It didn't make sense for a regular scarecrow to be holding something like that. That's it. I'm out. I knew I'd have to call Robert as soon as I got out of this place. I backed away slowly. The ground was covered in leaves. I turned my head, and that's when I felt something brush the back of my head, and I heard a high-pitched whisper in my ear. Panic took over. I broke into a full sprint, desperate to get out of that place. The bushes and vines seemed to have grown thicker since I'd walked in. They tangled around my legs, almost tripped me up a few times too. And the scarecrows. They were everywhere now, more than before. Some were up in the trees now too, like they were waiting to jump me. I almost ran into a few of them as I crashed through bushes, and this whole time, I keep hearing the grinding noises. They surrounded me coming from all directions, but no matter which way I turned, or how fast I ran, I kept finding myself back at the stream's edge. The camp shouldn't be this big. I pulled out the map again, hoping Rob left me a clue. The landscape around me looked all wrong. Nothing matched up. I looked back down at the note about the stream. I followed the squiggly line until I saw another note Rob made. Just downstream was a place he had marked as a dog den. I don't know what that meant, but the last rule flashed in my mind. Follow the dogs when you get lost. Funny choice of words there. When I get lost, not if. Looks like I don't have a choice. I ran along the stream, making sure to keep my distance. I couldn't see where the scarecrow with the hammer was, but there were more of them now, standing on the other bank. The grinding sound was much louder. I couldn't take my eyes off the path for too long, but every time I looked to the side, I'd see more and more scarecrows coming out of the trees. I never saw any of them move, but every time I looked back, they seemed to have shifted closer to the stream's edge. I ran faster, until I saw a flash of red in the water. I almost tripped at what I saw, because some of them are in the stream now. Their necks were all twisted to look at me. Their eyes had a lifelike shine to them now. Behind me, the grinding concrete noises grew louder, closing in on me fast. I was almost out of breath. They're playing with me. I realized my chest was on fire, and that's when I heard a sharp screech. In front of me was a gray brindle dog, fur all puffed out, looking like it was ready to take on the world. It was barking, not at me, but at what's behind me. Another dog, a white one, darted out from the bushes. It leaped at something behind my back. I heard a sickening ripping sound and a loud thud as something heavy fell to the ground. I didn't have the guts to turn around and see what it was. More dogs had appeared now, barking and surging around me. More heavy thuds sounded from behind me. I fell to my knees, trying to catch my breath, and that's when I saw the orange dog. It was sitting calmly on a fallen log, its tail swishing slowly from side to side. I didn't know what else to do. "You know a way out, bud?" I asked. The dog twitched its nose before jumping into the brush. It kept its tail up like a beacon for me to follow, so that's what I did. Every now and then it would glance back as if to make sure I was still there. Its fur stood out against the dark. Behind me, I could hear the other dogs barking and crying out. I can't hear any of the grinding noises anymore. My guide picked up the pace, darting through the weeds. I did my best to keep up. Every time it looked back at me, it felt like a silent promise that I wasn't alone in this. That tiny bit of hope kept me moving, even when my lungs burned and my legs ached. Slowly, things started to look more familiar. The sound of the stream faded away, and the thick bushes and vines thinned out. The ground evened out. Finally, We broke free from the dense growth. I was now standing in the middle of the camp. No creepy scarecrow statues anywhere. Weak sunlight was just breaking over water. The dog slowed down, and I could see the entrance gate in the distance. I let out a breath and glanced back. Behind me was just open space. A couple of old, rotting picnic tables scattered around. No sign of the forest, the stream, or any of the scarecrows. The orange dog started circling around my legs, whining softly and rubbing against me. I reached down to pet its soft fur. It was nice, having something make sense again, something warm and safe. I picked him up before heading for the gates. The sky was getting lighter now, which made it easier to see that the statue by the entrance was gone. I'll have to give Robert a call once I'm out of this place. But for now, I got a favor to return. I got back to my tent, settled in, and tore off a huge chunk of my tuna fish sandwich. The dog whined softly and snuggled up close, making itself comfortable as it ate. That's when I spotted something I hadn't noticed before. It had a collar around its neck, with a name tag. I reached down and looked. The dog's name was Sarah. The old house was not just old. It was a testament to a time that refused to be forgotten. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, climbed the brick walls, pulling at the mortar and obscuring the windows like a shroud. The paint on the shutters was a faded, peeling blue, and the front door, a heavy slab of dark oak, was warped and cracked. A small, handwritten sign, barely visible through the overgrowth, said estate sale. A single car sat in the driveway, its windows clouded with moisture. I had been driving for hours, trying to outrun a silence that had taken root in my life after my brother Leo had moved across the country. We were inseparable, a single unit of shared jokes and childhood memories, and now the space he left behind in our small apartment felt like a physical absence, a black hole of quiet. My therapist had suggested I explore new environments, and in my aimless wandering, I found myself drawn to the peculiar kind of nostalgia of forgotten households. The inside was a museum of someone else's life. Each room a chapter. The air was thick with the smell of dust, mothballs, and a faint cloying sweetness of perfume that had long since lost its vibrancy. I passed through a living room filled with furniture draped in white sheets, their forms like silent ghosts in a dimly lit study. Old books with leather spines lay scattered on a desk, their pages yellowed and brittle. It was in the kitchen, a room that smelled faintly of cinnamon and old tea, that I found it, tucked away on a shelf in a pantry. Behind a stack of faded cookbooks was a small handheld camera. It was not a modern digital camera, but an old, film-based one, a Polaroid. The plastic casing was a faded yellow, and the strap was frayed, but it felt solid and surprisingly heavy in my hands. The lens was clean, and the viewfinder, though a bit hazy, still offered a tiny window into the room. There was a small note taped to the back of it, written in shaky, elegant script. It said, "To capture the moments we wish to keep, be careful what you wish for." A woman, perhaps in her 60s, with a kind but tired face, was sitting at a small table, sipping a cup of tea. She was the one running the sale. "That old thing," she said, looking up as I approached. "My mother loved that camera, said it never took a bad picture, but we couldn't get it to work for years." She gave a small, sad smile. "We even found a box of old film for it. No one knew where it came from." I looked at the camera in my hands. The shutter button was smooth, worn from years of use. It felt like it was humming, a low vibration that wasn't really there. "How much for it?" I asked, a strange compulsion washing over me. $1, she said, without hesitation. Everything in this room is $1. I paid her and left, the camera in the small, mysterious box of film tucked securely in a bag. The sky was darkening, and a soft, steady rain began to fall as I drove away. The old house, now a silhouette against the gray sky, seemed to be watching me go, its unblinking windows like a pair of vacant eyes. Back in my apartment, the camera felt less like an antique and more like a companion. It sat on my coffee table, a curious piece of a forgotten life in the middle of my own. That night, I carefully loaded a film cartridge into it. I pressed the shutter button. The flash popped, a bright, startling burst of light that left a spot dancing in my vision. A moment later, a blank white rectangle slid out from the front of the camera. I placed it on the table and waited. Slowly, as if by magic, an image began to appear. It was a picture of my living room, but something was off. The furniture was the same, but the room felt different, darker, heavier, and in the corner, just barely visible in the shadows, was a figure, a man. His face was a blur, but his form was distinct, a phantom presence in my empty room. I stared at the photo, my heart hammering against my ribs. It had to be a trick of the light, a malfunction of the old camera. My mind was playing tricks on me. I took another picture, this time pointing the camera at myself. The flash burst again, and another blank rectangle slid out. This time, the image that developed was clearer. It was me, sitting on my couch, looking at the camera. But behind me, in the space where Leo used to sit, was a blurry figure. A hand rested on my shoulder, a hand I couldn't remember feeling. I dropped the picture, the camera clattering to the floor. Panic set in. I picked up the camera, the plastic casing now feeling cold and alien. I took it to my car and drove it to a dumpster behind a grocery store. Tossing it deep inside, I didn't look back. I had to get rid of it. I had to get rid of whatever it was. But the next morning, it was on my doorstep. I didn't understand how. I hadn't left a key with anyone. It was just there, sitting on the welcome mat, a small, faded yellow object that seemed to hum with a silent, malevolent energy. A new film cartridge was loaded into it, and a new note was taped to the back. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Are you sure you want to forget? It read. The quiet in my apartment was now gone, replaced by a constant, low-level hum, a buzzing that seemed to emanate from the camera. I would be walking down the hall and see a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, a shadow that wasn't there when I turned my head. My phone would ring, and when I answered, all I would hear was a soft, static-filled clicking, like the sound of a camera shutter. My cats, who had always been a source of comfort, now refused to enter the room where the camera was. They would sit in the hallway, their eyes wide, their fur bristling, staring at the closed door. It felt like I was being watched, a constant, unseen presence sharing my space. The worst part was the dreams. I would dream I was holding the camera, but instead of taking pictures, it was taking memories. I would press the shutter, and the memory would slide out. A photograph of me and Leo laughing, me and my parents on a vacation, and in each photo, a small blurry figure stood in the background, watching. As I would watch, the figures in the photos would slowly start to fade, their faces becoming blurred, their bodies becoming transparent. One night, I woke up with a gasp. My heart pounding, I stumbled to the living room, and there it was, sitting on the coffee table, a blank white rectangle, slid out from the camera. As I watched, an image began to appear. It was a picture of me, sleeping in my bed, looking peaceful, oblivious, And standing over me, leaning over the bed, was the blurry figure from the other photos. Its hand was reaching for my face, a long, pale shadow in the dimly lit room. The camera flash went off, a silent, terrifying burst of light. I don't know who the figure is. I don't know what it wants, but I know that it's here. I've taken all the pictures I can, and each one shows it closer, clearer. The last one I took shows it standing right beside me, its face still blurred, but its eyes are like a void, two empty spaces where light should be. They're filled with a deep consuming hunger, and now I can't stop taking pictures. I keep hoping that one of them will show me what it is, what it wants, but all they show is it getting closer. It's a race against time, a desperate attempt to capture a truth I'm not sure I want to see. The old woman at the estate sale said her mother loved the camera. Did she love it because it let her keep the moments she cherished, or because it helped her forget the ones she didn't? And what happens to a person when a memory, a part of who they are, is taken away? Does it leave a void, or does something else fill that space? The city had a way of swallowing up its history, of paving over the past with concrete and steel. But in the older districts, whispers of what once was lingered in the air, a faint scent of old brick, damp earth, and wood smoke. It was on one of these streets, a narrow lane lined with ancient row houses, that I found it, a makeshift sign, crudely painted on a sheet of plywood, leaned against a peeling lamppost. Moving sail, everything must go.
I was a sound editor, a man who spent his days dissecting the world into its auditory components, the rustle of a leaf, the click of a lock, the subtle shift in a person's voice that betrays a hidden emotion. My world was a world of sound, and the silence in my own life felt like a profound, unnatural absence. My wife Anna had left 6 months ago, and with her went the sound of her laughter, the rhythm of her footsteps, the low hum of her singing as she cooked in the kitchen. My therapist, a quiet man with a penchant for proverbs, had suggested I find a new sound to focus on. So I wandered, my ears earthen to the city's symphony, and I found myself drawn to the quiet discord of this old street.
The house itself was a narrow, 3-story affair, its windows dark and empty, like eyes that had seen too much. The front door was ajar, a sliver of darkness that seemed to beckon me inside. The interior was a jumble of half-packed boxes and shrouded furniture, a chaotic map of a life in transit. The air was heavy with the smell of dust, old books, and a faint, electric tang I couldn't place. It was in a small, cramped room on the 3rd floor, a room that seemed to have been a child's bedroom, that I found it. It sat on a rickety wooden desk, half hidden beneath a stack of comic books and a tarnished trophy. It was a tape recorder, an old reel-to-reel model, its metal casing scuffed and worn. The reels, a pair of dark plastic circles, were a strange, antiquated sight. I picked it up. It was surprisingly light, and a small, delicate hum seemed to emanate from its core, a sound only I could hear. A small tag, tied to the microphone cord with a piece of faded twine, had a single word written on it in faded ink: voices. A man with a tired face and gray hair was sitting on a box in the hallway, looking through a photo album. He was the one running the sale. "That old thing," he said, a sad smile on his face. "My son's. He was a strange kid. He used to record everything, said he wanted to capture the sounds no one else heard. He swore it was a magic recorder." He gestured with a hand toward the device. "It broke years ago. The playback button never worked. Just the record button." I ran my thumb over the worn plastic of the recorder. The hum I felt seemed to intensify, I didn't care if it worked or not. There was a story here, a soundscape waiting to be discovered. How much? I asked, a strange sense of purpose filling me. $1, he said, barely looking up from his photos. Take it off my hands, please. I placed $1 on top of the photo album and walked out with the recorder. The sun was setting, casting long, unsettling shadows down the narrow street. The house, now a dark silhouette against the fiery sky, seemed to sigh, a quiet exhalation of a life being packed away forever. Back in my apartment, the recorder looked out of place, an analog relic in a digital world. I sat it on my sound mixing board, a stark contrast to the sleek modern equipment. That night, I carefully threaded a blank reel of tape onto the machine. I hit the record button. A tiny red light blinked on, and the reels began to turn. With a soft, steady whir, I let it run for a few minutes, recording the quiet of my apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant wail of a siren. I hit the stop button, then, without thinking, I hit the playback button. Even though the man had said it didn't work, there was a moment of silence. Then a low, faint sound, a whispering, filled my headphones. It wasn't the sounds I had just recorded. It was something else. A woman's voice, barely audible, seemed to be speaking from the very heart of the machine. It was a lament, a sad, whispered poem about a love that had ended. The voice was mournful, beautiful, and utterly heart-wrenching. I had no idea where the sound was coming from. It wasn't on the tape I had just recorded. It was a ghost in the machine. The next night, I recorded again. The red light blinked, the reels turned, and I let it run for an hour. When I hit the stop button, a strange compulsion came over me. I hit playback. This time, I heard a man's voice. It was a story, told in a low, gravelly tone, about a son who had left home and a father who couldn't let go. It was a story of regret and loss, a story that felt painfully familiar. I felt a chill trace its way up my spine. The voices weren't coming from the tape, they were coming from somewhere else. From the house, from the past. Panic set in. I took the recorder, wrapped it in a towel, and shoved it deep into my closet, out of sight, out of mind. It had to be my imagination, a psychological reaction to my own loneliness, my own feelings of loss. But the silence didn't return. The silence was now replaced by a chorus of whispers. I would be walking through my apartment and hear a faint, distorted snippet of a conversation coming from the closet, a lover's quarrel, a hushed secret. I would be watching TV, and the sound of the show would be subtly overlaid with the sound of a child's laughter, a muffled giggle that was not my own. My neighbor's dog, usually a boisterous creature, would now sit outside my door and whimper, its tail tucked between its legs. One evening, I was on the phone with Anna, a tense conversation about the divorce settlement. "You sound so distant," she said, her voice sounding far away. "It's like you're not even listening." At that very moment, a low, guttural growl, a sound I knew belonged to a man, a sound filled with rage and sorrow, filled my headphones. It wasn't loud enough for Anna to hear, but it was loud enough for me. It was the sound of a life falling apart. "I have to go," I said, my voice shaking. I hung up the phone and stared at the closet. The sound of a woman crying, a soft, heartbreaking sound, now filled my apartment. That night, I had a dream. I was standing in a room, but it wasn't my apartment. It was the room from the 3rd floor of the old house. The air was filled with the sound of laughter, a happy chorus of voices. I saw a family, a mother, a father, and a small boy. They were all talking, their voices a symphony of happiness. But as I watched, the sound began to distort, to become garbled and strange. The father's voice became a growl, the mother's a sob, the boy's a whimper. They all looked at me, their faces full of a desperate, silent plea, as if begging me to turn the sound off. I tried to cover my ears, to scream, to run, but my body was frozen. I woke up with a gasp, the sound of a woman's sob echoing in my ears. I stumbled out of bed, ran to the closet, and took out the recorder. I hit the playback button, even though I knew I shouldn't. The sound of Anna's voice filled the room, not from the phone call, but from a different time, a happier time. She was singing, the same low hum she used to sing in the kitchen, but underneath her voice, I could hear a whisper, a sound that wasn't hers. It was a man's voice, a growl, a promise of a different kind of ending. I threw the recorder in the trash. I had to get rid of it, but the next morning, it was back, sitting on my mixing board. A single, old-fashioned reel of tape loaded onto it. The tape was playing, but there was no sound at all. Just a profound, heavy silence. The same silence I had been running from, and I knew, in that moment, that the recorder wasn't recording voices. It was recording the absence of them. Do you ever wonder what happens to the sounds people leave behind? Do you ever think that some of them don't want to be forgotten, that they want to be re-recorded, to be played over and over again, a symphony of a life that's already over?